Hi, I'm Scott Jones. I'm Acting Director of Electronic Frontiers, Georgia. And our talk today is negative space signaling. Is this a threat to election integrity? So this is a talk that we had just given to DC 404, and now we're also giving it within our group here. So I want to start off with what is negative space? Well, negative space is a concept from art and graphic design. It's a space around the design with no text, graphics, icons, or anything like that. And the relationship between the negative space and the content is important with graphic design. Actually, if you've got your microphone on, if you could turn it off for right now. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat area, and I'll try to get to it. For right now, if you could turn off your microphone, that would be good. So we've got the negative space here. What's negative space signaling? With negative space signaling, we're passing a message in the defined negative space, and that's your negative space signaling. The question is it like steganography? Well, steganography is hiding a message inside plain content. And this is in some ways, this is kind of like the opposite of steganography. Steganography is invisible to a person, but if you have decryption software, it can be found if the decryption software knows where to look. But with the negative space signaling, scanning equipment that might be scanning, say, a ballot, is not able to see the negative space signaling. However, it's obvious to a person. So the point of the negative space signaling is that it's obvious to a person, but it may be missed by scanning software. And so why does it matter for ballots? Here's an example of an absentee ballot, and we've actually put in a message here in the blank space, in the white space. We added this just to demonstrate what it looks like. So why does it matter? A voting-related activist group known as Voter GA sued the state to obtain an Arizona-style ballot audit in Fulton County. And by Arizona style, I mean that they wanted physical access to the actual paper ballots that were produced by both the absentee ballots and ballot marking devices that we had. And the judge actually denied the physical access to the ballots, but he allowed access to the digital scans of the ballots. Separately, a Georgia legislator plans to file a bill this year to make digital scans of all ballots public. There's an emerging national trend to make all digital scans public, and it's driven by the trend toward ballot marking devices or universally utilized ballot marking devices. And as more districts and more states put in ballot marking devices, there's a trend to be able to actually scan the paper and make these scans public for everyone. So what is the problem with all this? So the issue is negative space signaling plus the widely available digital ballot scans really shows up what the problem is. Vote buying is a serious threat to election integrity. It predates America and has occurred globally, such as the spendthrift election. It was problematic here in the US in the 19th century before reforms began around 1890, and this is in the post-Civil War era. Voter intimidation is also a concern. If a vote can be verified, a punitive action can be taken against the voter if they casted an undesired vote, or they could be rewarded for a desired vote. Intimidation could include being fired from a job, spousal abuse, or shunning, or anything like that. So the problem here is that negative space signaling combined with public and pervasively available digital scans allows voters to be identified at scale. Let's go into this a little bit more. Let me drill down a little bit here. In this case, illegal voting schemes require two things. The vote needs to be knowable, and that's the content. And the voter also must be knowable, and that's identity. If we put those two together, we get voter identification. So voter identification allows for numerous illegal schemes, and including, as we talked about, vote buying and vote intimidation. Negative space signaling allows for this voter identification. The voter can write in an identifying mark in the negative space. It could be a code, it could be a symbol, it could be anything. Digital access makes the content of the vote known. the ballot's content is revealed. And so negative space signaling is how you identify the voter. The voter identity can be revealed this way. Now the ballot and the vote can be connected to an individual, and this makes these illegal schemes possible. Okay, let's talk about at scale for a moment. Negative space signaling was possible in the past with paper ballots, but it really wasn't an issue because the distribution could not occur at scale. Let's say, for example, you had a court order to be able to examine the ballots from a particular county. In the past, they would have to be photocopied at some expense, and then pragmatically speaking, you'd have to have a crew of people to examine the paper. Again, that would be some expense to you. And now in the digital age, we can immediately and effortlessly distribute these copies at scale. And another issue that we have is OCR, or scanning software. So we could very easily automate searches for signals that were written in the margins of the ballots. And this makes ballot identification very quick and efficient, and also could make payment systems very quick and efficient if you were trying to buy an election one vote at a time. The ballot copies, if they are available to all and essentially free, they open the possibility of abuse at scale, and this has really never been possible before. Ballots are not flagged for individual review by today's ballot scanner tech unless a stray mark ventures into the scanned area. That's something that could be addressed by vendors, but to our knowledge, it hasn't been addressed yet. So if we could extrapolate from this, we could talk about the nightmare scenarios. Let's imagine for a moment a voting pays app where you basically you enter your identifying information to identify to a computer what precinct you're in, and then it gives you a code or a symbol or something to write on the ballot when you go in to vote. And then think about this being done at scale. This would be very easy to do this 10,000 times, 20,000 times, 50,000 times. You could very easily identify marks at a large number of marks, like 50,000 marks. That wouldn't be hard with scanning software, and you could very easily and efficiently push out payments as soon as the digital scans become available. And even if you had a rejection rate with your OCR of 10%, in a matter of days to weeks, you could go through those ballots manually and identify the signals. It has a lot of the same problems as blockchain. If you're putting illegal content in blockchain, it's copied thousands and thousands of times. The nightmare scenario here might be some kind of stamp or image with child porn in it. If you have child porn, that could be copied, hundreds of thousands of times into if many people are downloading the ballots, and they may not know because it may be buried in a ballot that's somewhere way down the stack. And technically that makes everybody who has a copy in possession of child porn, which is a federal offense. The other thing is thinking about attacking the scanner. We normally think about attacking the touchpad, but if you can attack the scanner, you could synthesize a signal that's not actually on the paper. And one very simple attack I can think of is to simply take a loose piece of paper and write a code or a signal and shove it into the scanner at the same time that you shove your ballot in. This is not physically attached to the ballot. So it goes through, it gets scanned on top of the ballot, and then it just falls into the collection bin at the same time as the ballot. But if you go back and look at the ballot, if you go back and try to find the ballot, you can't find it. It's not connected to the ballot in any way. So a very simple attack on the scanner is just to shove in a tiny little piece of paper when you shove in your ballot, and then it just falls away when the ballot gets pulled into the scanner. Mitigations. Are there any possible mitigations here? We could talk about technical mitigations, such as masking off the sides of the ballot and only scanning the areas where you actually have text, or where you would actually circle, color in a circle or something like that. The downside is I think that this is not going to be satisfying to voting activists who want to examine the entire piece of paper. They might be examining for For example, they might be looking for whether they think the ballot was photocopied, things like that, and they will want to examine the entire ballot at a high scan rate to do this. A legal policy fix would be to require judges to restrict distribution to a very limited set of authorized persons instead of opening it up to the public and opening it up widespread. And if that's being done, then watermarking technology is available to identify any leaks. If the ballots got out in the public and they weren't authorized to do that, watermarking technology is available to determine which organization and perhaps which person leaked the ballots. Is there any precedent for this? Well, this issue was identified in a published paper in 2013, and we're not the first to identify it. So in the Election Law Journal, this article, Ballots, Transparency, and Democracy, covers exactly this issue, and the URL is up there above the page. And the paper itself talks about mitigations, and the mitigations coming from the paper assumes that you want to distribute the digital scans as much as possible, but you know, you may not be able to distribute all of them, but they want to still distribute it, scans as much as possible. One option is to disqualify ballots with stray marks. The downside of this is that you could lose a substantial number of ballots, even if there's no malicious intent, because it's possible to make accidental marks on a ballot, especially the absentee ballot. Masking or filtering, which we talked about before, you'd have to have some kind of software solution to remove stray marks or mark them out if they're not in the payload area of the ballot. And you can withhold ballots just with the stray marks from public review, but still count the votes. But then you've got a detection problem. What constitutes a stray mark versus a real mark on the ballot? And if it goes through the area with the circle, how do you count it? So there's a lot of questions there that automation may not be able to handle very well. So the upshot from all of this is EFGA does not know of any instances of this occurring in the 2020 election, and we want to be clear about that. We're calling it out as a potential practical problem in the near future. It's actually not a problem with the old vulnerable DRE machines or mechanical machines unless it could be done via a write-in candidate. That's the only example I could think of where you could identify a vote is by having a strange or creative name as a write-in candidate. Also, this is a problem with the current election technology that we have in Georgia, which is universally utilized ballot marking devices. Unfortunately, it's also a problem with the activist preferred solution of hand-marked paper ballots. Many activists prefer the solution of hand-marked paper ballots, but it has the same issue here. We feel that the issue doesn't advance any particular advocate's agenda, and this issue will likely get criticized from this for calling this out from all sides, but we do feel it's a legitimate concern, and we feel like we had to mention it somewhere, somehow. The issue, I believe, will likely spread to other states and countries as ballot marking devices are more common, and the ballot scans are increasingly released publicly on the internet. So I don't see this problem going away. I see it just getting worse. Here's a new slide that I have since the DC 404 presentation. It turns out that SB 202, which was the omnibus voting bill that was passed in the session this year, actually allows any party to request ballot images from a specific county. The ballot request is not free, though, however, and if you want to do this, expect to pay a few $100s for each county. Excuse me. So I think at this point, the cost is a disincentive to run an organized scam. It may not absolutely prevent any scam from occurring if you've got the budget to do it, but it's going to keep it from being done casually. So we hope that this is a deterrent for now. Some disclosures that we want to go over. EFGA did not access any state systems or the systems of any state vendors to obtain the finding. EFGA did not violate authorization or exceed access rights in order to obtain the finding. All the ballot images we found were posted on social media, and we consider these publicly accessible. Also, this is not a vendor-specific vulnerability. It is an unintended consequence, and it's a policy issue, not a vendor issue. So there was no specific vendor to pre-disclose to in this case. And we feel that anyone else could have come to this conclusion or published these concerns eventually. So we were not specifically situated in a privileged position where we were able to see this first. I think this could have anybody could have come to this conclusion. Okay, so questions. I can open this up to question and answers at this point if you want to turn on your mic or your speaker, or I'll just take a look at what's been posted in the chat. Okay, we got some comments from Keith. Would anybody else like to ask a question?
What was the bill again?
Well, I'm sorry, what?
What was the bill number?
The SB 202? That was the 98-page omnibus bill. SB 202. And if you search for this in Google, you're not going to find the latest version. You need to go to legis.ga.gov and look for the as passed version, because that's the one that's was made law and in force. And the version that you find if you search for this in Google was an earlier version with a lot of things crossed out in it. So you should look for the as passed version. Are there any other questions? Any other discussion?
Well, yeah, I agree. You're going to get hit by both sides.
Yeah, this is not going to be a popular disclosure.
Yeah. And of course, coming from Georgia, we're hot right now. The most, I guess the most descriptive thing to say about issues like this is you really lose control once it's out, especially as the conversation on Saturday talked about trying to get a legislative remedy.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be an easy or quick fix. But I think that we should continue to push it, and eventually we're probably going to see something where somebody's going to have an aha moment and say that, oh, this is a problem. Freya is asking on the chat that when she says, when I voted for the 2020 general election, I got a printout that I then put in a scanner. How could this be vulnerable? Well, there's a small window of time between the time that you got the printout and the time that you walk it over to the scanner that you would have an opportunity to write in the margin on the piece of paper. And then that's how you would do it. And it would probably be, we suspect it would be ignored if it's fully in the margin and it doesn't cross into the area. You need to be aware that in this case, that if you go in person and you vote in person, that your votes are actually captured in the barcode, and the scanner is not looking at the text that's human readable. The current system that we have looks only at the barcode, but if you request the scans of the ballots, you're going to see the entire ballot with the barcode and all the text. And so for recounts that are done by hand, you would be looking at the text. But there's an opportunity, there's a small window of time, a small opportunity to grab a pencil or something like that and jot something in the margin before you put it in the scanner. And that's what I'm talking about. I also mentioned putting a small, kind of jamming a small piece of paper, if it could be done, if it could be done surreptitiously as you insert your ballot, that might also be an issue. But I think that maybe the staff would be looking for that. You could try to hide something under your thumb, but that's a possibility. That's the first thing I could think of. Does that answer the question? And Keith has posted the link.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
No, the question yeah, I did think of that, but I was wondering about other vulnerabilities. And of course, what
Yeah,
could
and
you
there may
draw
be
that
other
could cause?
vulnerabilities. I'm not saying that there aren't any other vulnerabilities. There may be
Yeah,
other
but,
ways to attack the scanner that I
Yeah, and of
haven't
course,
thought
you
of.
wouldn't want something to put some sort of code in there that would mess up it's reading the barcode so that umpty votes go to the wrong person.
There may be other attacks too, but this is what came to mind.
So,
Of course,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
So if someone were, if I understand correctly, if someone were going to attack the scanner, then a vote buying scheme would have to have somebody at every precinct where someone who perhaps used an app to identify their vote being for sale, they would have to go to those. They would have to have somebody go to those precincts. And,
It wouldn't necessarily have to be every precinct. If it requires a person, maybe just enough to tip the balance, if you think about the largest precincts. But even then, if you can do it in an automated way that's not occurring while the voting is happening, then that would be the best way to do it. So, I think that a plan that requires a person to be in place at every precinct is probably doomed to fail. So I doubt that that would work, because I don't think you're going to be able to pull together enough people for that. But if you can find a way to do it to stack the deck in advance, or if you think about a vote buying scheme, the person with the incentive is going to be the voter, and finding other players to get involved. Well, I think you'd have to pay them more than you're paying the voter. So it's hard for me to think of a way to make that work, pragmatically speaking.
Right now, this is just a Georgia issue. However, there are other states talking about doing similar things. So if this caught on nationally, then it allows for abuse at scale.
Yeah, and I want to mention that this paper, and this is back in 2013, points out that the practice of writing signals in the margin is actually made illegal. Of course, vote buying should already be illegal in Georgia. And some people, if we take this to the legislators, they may just say, well, vote buying is illegal. We've got all the protection we need against this. But there are a few states where making identifying marks in the ballot, on the ballot, is itself illegal, and it would be the voter that gets into trouble. As far as I know, that's not true here, but I'd love to have an attorney be able to review that with us and let us know if that is a problem.
Yeah, there are things you do by policy, and there's things you do by mitigation through technological control or some type of compensating security. And that's what we're looking at here is, yeah, there could be a law that says you're not allowed to buy votes, but we also have to put something in place that prevents it from happening, because you only have a problem of buying votes if you detect that they're buying votes and you can take action against it. And that's the problem, is stray marks in the margins that look like just scribbles or nonsense. How do you prove that it's actually a type of communication? That's very difficult. The other factor of this is, from an adversarial point of view, as a government adversary, if I want to taint an election, I don't actually have to taint the election. I just have to demonstrate the possibility of it and demonstrate that there's some evidence that you can't prove it's not, and I've tainted your election.
Yeah, just to undermine the confidence is sometimes that's enough.
Yeah, that's the biggest downside I see for attacks on EFF, that the very people that could perhaps address the issue are going to just throw it out there as another reason to attack election integrity. And and they would use the opportunity, and of course, I'm projecting in advance, they would use the opportunity to do even more things than SB 202 already did, in the name of integrity.
Yeah, I mean, that's a downside. I think that we're able to identify the problem, but we haven't identified a perfect fix for it, and it could really get out of hand if you just
that was the next point. I would say going in without a remedy is going to be tough to do. It's almost like, you know, there should be a separate huddle with folks or the lawyers going over all the possible attacks and objections to prepare a response. Because, I mean, you know, on the one hand, I could say, okay, you know, attempting to address this and talking about the ways the system is flawed, does that force the companies to scramble to come up with a remedy of their own to make them do it?
Yeah, we don't know if the policy fix or the technology fix or both is going to be the best solution. I'm a bit leery about having each vendor go off and do their own thing, because then you can get something that's inconsistent. I think at this point, probably the best thing for us to do is to talk to sympathetic attorneys in the state and, you know, try to take what we've got and put it against the background of existing law. I'm a little bit weak on where we are with existing law, and we're going to have to put this in some perspective to know kind of where you would go with a policy fix. But as far as a technology fix, we already have a designated vendor. And if we bring in additional vendors, or if we try to switch to another vendor, that it becomes a competitive issue. There's a lot of ways that could kind of go wrong. And, you know, like I said, I'm not very confident on the masking option. There are ways that you could get around it by going to the edge of the mask if you know where the mask is. And it's unsatisfying to some of the voting advocates who really want to see the entire ballot, including the stray marks.
Yeah, but that's the sort of the kind of thought that I think needs to happen, you know, in a separate conversation of how do you answer potential objections.
Yeah, and so I think this is going to be kind of an offline conversation for us to develop strategically.
Yeah, I just have seen too much get out of control once it's unleashed at the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
The very person that says, "Oh, I'll work with you on a bill," will undermine you.
In some ways, we're saying the king has no clothes, but we haven't said how we go about getting him a wardrobe. So right now we're trying to say, hey, is it just me that thinks the king has no clothes, or does anybody else here think this is a problem? And so that's kind of where we are at the moment. So once we get some more people look at this, get involved in it, get some more minds on it, we're going to look at those questions about how we address this from the perspective of taking it.
And we're continuing to circulate the issue to see, because we don't see it actively being exploited today. It's it looks like a possible near future thing, but we don't see it actively being exploited today, and we want to kind of head it off at the pass.
Well, the only reason somebody's attempted to exploit it is because nobody knew this existed until after the election was over. They made this decision. So there was no opportunity prior to actually try to use it for this. But once this becomes known, expect people to try to use this. And
and I wanted to make the point that this really it may really have more to do with the widespread distribution of the scans. that the more you restrict the distribution of the scans, regardless of what people are doing in the margins, which is going to be harder to regulate. The more you restrict the scans, the less useful this is to any potential attacker. I think the nightmare scenario is, everything being released 100% of the time for free and open to all, and that's the concern. And we aren't there yet, because you still have to pay a fair amount if you want to get ballots from a particular county, and then it's county by county. So it's not going to be as easy to do just yet.
Yeah, and that leads me to suggest for the presentation to verbalize twice that, hey, we don't think this has been used. In other words, what you say at the end, give a mini version in the beginning, so the people don't think you're leading up to something that's been identified out there. It's a scheme that's been identified that we want to stop. It's the flaw that we want to correct.
Yeah, in fact, a good way to look at that is, I agree with Larry on this. It's a good way to look at this is, this was only discovered after the election, they decided to produce the ballots in this way. That's when we discovered the hole. Prior to that, it didn't exist at scale. It just didn't exist.
So a lawyer could answer whether appealing that decision would postpone scheming and give people time to correct it. Does that make sense?
Well, the ruling was for this specific election.
Okay.
Case.
Yeah. Okay. Good point.
But there was sentiment made at the time that, hey, maybe this is a good idea we do on a regular basis. And that's where it becomes the problem. That hasn't been decided yet, but people are headed in that direction. We're trying to get them to not drive the car off the cliff, because we know there's a cliff over there. Let's not drive off the cliff.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think of an analogy that would be used as a point of sort of, oh, well, it's something we'll have to watch for. But I was thinking of the airport. You could have somebody outside the airport with a sign that says, the airlines can't guarantee that your flight won't be hijacked. Well, people are going to fly anyway. It could be that people don't care if they think it's now exposed and it'll be taken care of, even if they don't know how.
Yeah, well, there may not be it may not be it may not be fully appreciated until somebody really does take advantage of it. But that's why we wanted to bring this up, kind of, as a preemptive strike on any potential mischief. Well,
I'd go over all the reasons that you stated, that there's no good remedy yet. It's got to be well thought out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the best remedy at this point is to speak out against the widespread distribution of all ballot images, which has been it's been a proposal, and I think it's been on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, that it's coming from both parties.
And that should be made clear, I think, as a little addition. I don't think that was anywhere in the formal presentation outline.
No, because I'm just trying to get the basic concept out. I wanted something that non-technical people wouldn't feel intimidated about it. But do you have any other comments on the presentation or the issue in general? I mean, I think my game plan is I'd like to get a sympathetic attorney to look at this. And then at some point we need to start to circulate this among legislators to see if they understand and appreciate the problem.
Well, go through your roster of legal contacts, and if you don't come up with something, let me know, because there's SPLC and ACLU and
Yeah,
other
there's
law
other places
firms.
to go.
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Because I really think preparation is going to be 99%
Yeah,
of it, and anticipating the objections, and then having prepared responses is what would be needed.
yeah. So are there
I
any?
have a
Go ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
Does this relate to the Garland Favorito voter GA legal case that's being out
It
there?
does because I have basically been watching their group on Facebook, and they started posting ballots publicly, and basically they're crowdsourcing, looking for irregularities in the ballots. They've taken the scans and they've been posting them publicly. And so and they're putting them out there to let everyone kind of look for problems with the ballots. And then we found a ballot that was an absentee ballot. It was marked with a Sharpie, and they put the ballot in the envelope before the ink had dried. So it had bled through and it had bled over onto other pages. And there were a lot of stray marks. And I think there was no intent to do anything wrong. But when I saw that particular ballot, I realized we had a problem, because you were seeing marks in inappropriate places. You were seeing the name of a write-in candidate that bled through and was actually reversed on another piece of paper. And so it became obvious to me that if we start releasing these scans widely available, in a widely available way to the public, that there could be all kinds of mischief if you just confine the writing to the margins. And you could even make some kind of mark accidentally and have no malicious intent, and then you could end up re-identifying your ballot in the digital scans. And I think that is maybe one thing that people are going to do, is they're going to go out and look for their own ballot. And if there's something special about their pencil, or the way that they color in a circle, or something unique, and that they might go look for that. But of course, they might do something blatant, like writing their name on it, or writing their social security number, or something like that. It's possible that or writing some cute political slogan or something in the margin. Anything could happen, and that's why I think this is going to get out of hand at some point.
I agree with that part. I really do. Just simply because the fact that you can do that, and that people are looking so closely at them, means that whether it's unintentional, like the ballot we saw was probably someone who would have never ever considered that there was going to be any kind of ink bleeding, because you generally write something, would never even think of that, and it just happened, and someone else happened to notice it. Mm-hmm. But that noticing of it produced the idea that ended up being this PowerPoint presentation. And that's kind of where it becomes contagious, because you could say, wow, I really am nervous about elections. I think I'm going to put just a strange little symbol that will be almost innocuous, but I'm going to know it's mine. And then I could look for that later. If I happen to be in a county or a precinct, rather, that is highly contentious, that's something that could be used. That is, I'm not sure exactly how to describe, what that would be, but there is a motive behind it for sure. If you wanted to do that, to give yourself some assurance. And then there's all kinds of other things that people could think of. But I think because it could be put out on social media and discussed in that way, that's pretty clear that the idea around it is probably going to be the more immediate problem, because that'll be what causes, as Keith said before, the doubt, the mistrust. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be far more problematic, at least at the very beginning, and I would imagine, than the actual results that would come out of somebody doing something like that, because even though that it's possible at scale, it still is kind of a trick to pull off to have enough, because you would have to be very coordinated amongst yourselves that you were going to try to pull off a scheme like that. So it is a scheme, but it doesn't take very many of anybody to say that 2 or 3 people are going to discuss it, and that is pretty much all that it takes for something to go in a kind of a microwave viral, and that's all that it takes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to start off innocently enough, like I said, with people just writing some kind of slogan or something in the margins, for them to be able to find their own vote, and then it could just kind of balloon from there. So that was.
I agree, because that's some of the frustration that we heard through the purchasing of the voting machines and on into the present, is that one of the frustrations that people had about all of the different versions and why there was so much activity around that is that people really wanted to be able to identify that their vote was really counted. And
yeah,
you've identified here with Electronic Frontiers Georgia a way that they could possibly do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? I want to wrap up the recording for a minute, and then we'll have some casual talk after it's over. All right, I'm not seeing anything else, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the video and recording at this point, and then we can hang out and talk a little bit after it's over. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I think this is not the be-all and end-all conversation. This is just the beginning, but I wanted to get things kicked off with this particular concern, and we'll talk more about this later. Thank you for coming this evening.